We are going to be talking about monetizing your IP through licensing. So perhaps you are the idea guy or the idea gal behind our next greatest invention, but you don't have the skill or perhaps the desire to take on the roller coaster of starting, building, and growing a business. And that's right, today is National Roller Coaster Day, and I didn't make that up. Commercializing an invention is a very different adventure than being an inventor. It is one which can be both rewarding or, sadly, alternatively disastrous to those not having the right business know-how or financial resources. So our panel today, and you are about to meet them, are going to give you the highs and lows of the thrill ride known as licensing. So let's hop in, buckle up, keep our hands and feet inside the vehicle, and let's get rolling. Yes, it is the comedy corner here today. All right, so our first question, which is for all of our panel, is can you briefly introduce yourselves and describe your individual experience with licensing intellectual property?
My name is Matt Nuccia. I am the owner of Design Edge. We are a toy and game product development company that's been in existence for nearly 40 years and arguably the largest independent toy and game development company. We do work for the world's largest toy companies, Mattel, Hasbro, Spin Master, Jax, down to tabletop startups. We've been nominated for Toy of the Year, I think at this point 6 times, which is like the Academy Award of Toys, and Taggy, which is like the Grammys 11 times, but only won it once. And yeah, I've worked on everything in my career from Tickle Me Elmo and Pogs to Transformers, G.I. Joe, myriad of Barbie items, tons and tons of board-top games that you have. And odds are, if you got some toys in your house, something we've worked on is there. So it's been a very exciting career thus far, and we are very versed in licensing and can definitely expand upon it as we proceed with this conversation.
Matt, before we let you go, what did you do before the toy industry, or how was it that you jumped into the toy industry as opposed to some other?
Well, I did it the difficult way. I was born into it. My father started the toy industry in the late 1960s working for Ideal Toys, then Aurora, then he was at another toy company called HG for about 17 years, where I did some childhood modeling, so actually my career is even longer in the toy industry than I want to admit. Yeah, there's some really bad photos I can show you later of me on some Dukes of Hazzard packaging. Let's just say the flag on the General Lee doesn't ring so well these days, so it's not going to be shown so well. But yeah, that company got sold when I was 14, and my parents, my mother was an art teacher, started our company out of the garage, and I was drafted from day one. And here I've been thus far.
Fantastic. Raquel, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name's Raquel Graham, and I am the founder and CEO of Rock Innovation. And Rock is my nickname. And Rock Innovation is a product development company, which is a very, very fancy way of saying that I create products that are inspired by my life. So if I encounter any kind of frustration and it's not on the market, then I make it. And luckily, a lot of my frustrations have resonated with all of you, and the products have done well. I'm a Shark Tank winner. I won 2.5 years ago. I've been on Oprah's Favorite Things 3 years in a row. I've been on HSN for coming on 9 years now. I started, believe it or not, my very first account for my very first product was in licensing. So just to give everyone hope, because every single person that I encountered told me that I'd never land in licensing, that you have to have a track record and show sales, et cetera, and my very first product was in licensing. That's good news, and the bad news is that my very first product was in licensing. So it was hell, because I learned it on the fly. But yeah, so I am a serial inventor, and I have about 4 more products coming out in the next year in different categories.
Raquel, before we let you get away, did you always see yourself as an inventor from an early age? And Can you just share a couple of your products so we can think as to whether there's something that we've all enjoyed?
Sure. I've always been a tinkerer ever since I was a kid. So I've always wanted to, I'd never thought of myself as an inventor. And I'm definitely a product junkie. So even when catalogs were a thing, you could come to my house. I had stacks. Like, that was my guilty pleasure. It could be in fishing. It didn't matter if I was interested in not interested in it or not. I always just love products. And my first product was called Nex, N-E-K-Z, and it's a product that I created out of necessity for my kids when I lived in Chicago during the polar vortex, and they were young and they refused to wear scarves. So if you remember the polar vortex, and God forbid if you lived in Chicago during the polar vortex, you know that you couldn't even stick your finger outside the window without some kind of frostbite. And they were melting down. It was hell getting out of the house, and I just figured that I'd go online and find an alternative. But for kids, you can't give them anything that's scratchy or, that's tight around their neck. So turtleneck wasn't going to work, a gaiter wasn't going to work. And if you think about it, there's really been, for all of us, I'd argue, almost no innovation in the scarf market since we were all kids. It's the same thing, just different fabric. So I created, if you're old enough, you know what a dickie is. So that wouldn't work for a kid. But what I did was I created a patented closure just with Velcro so that they could do it. They could, and it was a little bit of fabric, and they could wear it tight or loose. And I cut and glued prototypes and gave them a couple, and the one that they loved, they never took off when they got home. And so it was really just kind of like a fluke. And then I made one for myself, and people loved it. And my very first account, I went to a college show, and I ended up on the top 40 NCAA college campuses with that product. So I never even came out with it for kids. It went straight to colleges, and then to HSN, and then to Oprah.
That's a pretty good trajectory, isn't it? Asmod, your turn. And I know you're in kind of a very different sphere, so please tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Osmod. I'm with FedTech. We are a venture builder based out of Arlington, but offices across the nation. So at FedTech, we take federal IPs and spin out startups out of it. In less than a decade since our inception, we have screened over 5,500 technologies and spun out more than 400 startups. They've gone on to raise more than $1 billion in private funding and around $950 million in government sector grants. So that's what FedTech does. My background largely I started with nonprofit, working at the intersections of government, nonprofit, helping innovators and entrepreneurs build ecosystem. So really trying to think of frontier markets in Asia. So largely was placed out of there. Then went on to work on a maps-based company for a ride-sharing firm, took an operations role, and also ran a civic tech firm. A lot of lessons on how not to fail, which eventually led me to FedTech on how to build ventures, deep tech ventures out of federal IP.
Fantastic. I know we're going to dig into that diverse background in our conversation here today for sure. Well, we're going to jump into some prepared questions, and our first one is for Rock. If I can use your nickname, if that's all right. What would you suggest are the initial steps an innovator should take to protect their IP before entering into license agreements?
Sure, in the audience what the different, everyone's background. So I'm just going to start from the fundamentals.
Would it be helpful if we asked for a show of hands of who have patents or trademarks?
Sure, yeah,
perhaps?
that'd be great, because that
How many of you in the audience have a U.S. patent? Fantastic. Congratulations.
Yay.
How many of you have more than one U.S. patent? All right, let's hear it for the young lady in the background, in the back row. How many of you have filed a U.S. patent application and it's undergoing prosecution. Okay? Excellent. Congratulations. How many of you have a federally registered trademark? Very good. How many of you are hoping to one day have a U.S. patent or trademark? This is where everyone's hand should go up. All of you. How many of you are small business owners?
Nice.
Beautiful. Thank you for your audience participation.
So then I think we all know the basics, I would say, so I'll just run through them quickly, which is you should be documenting your development process from the very beginning because you never know when you may need that. Then, of course, you're going to look for, begin to file your trademark or begin looking for your, trying to put together your patent application, which is, I would highly, highly recommend with as many applications as I've filed. I can't function without my lawyer. And I was just having this conversation backstage. Patent law is so incredibly complicated that from the very beginning, I would spend as much time by asking people to refer you to the best patent lawyer that you can afford, because down the line, I'm fortunate I have been able to keep the same patent lawyer for my entire career. And through my bumps and challenges, et cetera, he knows the patent better than I do, even though it's my idea. And to be very honest, I find it kind of impossible to even understand. So I just tell him, talk to me like a kindergarten, and I still can't get it. So I would really, really invest in that, because a good patent attorney will also help you with strategy, right? So it's all tied together. It's not, a good patent attorney understands the full scope and then can help you from A to B, far beyond just getting your patent, because there's so many steps to it. And in terms of, tell me the end part of the question again, tying it to?
The initial steps they should take to protect their IP before entering into a licensing agreement.
And then really understanding what is it that you are looking for. Like, do really deep research about licensing, because licensing, it's just not a one-size-fits-all. I started out in licensing in a very unique way. So I actually did a sub-license under someone who had the major license for all the colleges. And that's how I was easily able to accept contracts from the top 40 NCAA colleges, right? That's kind of like a cheat code way. I mean, it's legal, but it saves you time. That's one version of licensing, which, to be honest, I didn't even know existed. So there are so many different types of licensing agreements that you should become familiar with, so that you're more educated in the type of deals that you can secure or pursue, or know which companies have the best reputation. That's another thing that's critical, because there are a lot of companies that say they can do things that they really can't, et cetera. So there's just a lot of research around understanding your IP, and just the type of licensing agreements that work best for your product. It's never one size fits all.
To play off of Rock's answer, Rock, do you or any other members of our panel, you talked about the importance of doing your homework and appreciating and understanding the different type of licensing agreements that exist. Do any of you all have a recommendation for a tool, a resource, a book where people could educate themselves on this topic?
Well, yes, I would recommend Warren's book. Warren, can you please stand up? Inventor Confidential. It is a great book. But there are different types of licensing, but I think you're focusing, or it seemed to be, on what we refer to generally as third-party licensing. That's when you, like the NFL, or Disney or Marvel. And I'm in the toy business, so I'm going to lean into those. So they get a certain percentage off Excel. But I think from the U.S. Patent Office's perspective, we're talking about licensing your IP, not adding a license to your IP. So in the other direction. So that, yes, those contracts can get pretty thick, and there's a lot to learn. There are different standards for percentages depending on the industry to which you are licensing at. There are different terms, there are different advances, there are different guarantees, and knowing the industry to which you're focusing on will help tremendously. So there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all. So like in the toy industry, for instance, the standard licensing royalty rate is 5%. Generally, we figure out an advance based off the 20% of the first year's projected orders. But it's not the same in medical. Medical can get much higher licensing rates. So I don't know, did that help?
Yes. Anyone else want to jump in?
Well, just about, for anything that I do, I really try to find, and this is with business, this is with me finding manufacturers abroad. I always try to work my network to find someone who has some kind of personal relationship with that particular company, or definitely direct experience with what it is that I'm trying to go after. It's hard to, you're not going to find like Google reviews about some of this stuff with some of the companies.
You certainly need to find an attorney that specializes in the industry to which you're licensing to. Because, as I mentioned, you're getting, say, 5%. That 5% has a definition in the contract. And that definition can screw you big time if it is not worded properly. Because I can write you a contract that gives you 1%, and you can yield more than another contract that gives you 10% because the definitions aren't clear, or there are major loopholes in it, and grandma's in the book for $20 million a year.
And so, yet again, we circle back to the lawyer. It's just a very, very layered, nuanced, complicated field. And they get paid big bucks for it, but that's because there's that much money in the field.
While it could be a lawyer, it also could be a licensing agent. So if you find an agent in that industry, they should know the ins and outs of the standard contract to that particular industry. So that's when an agent can actually be of great value to you.
I'm going to move us on to our next question, and thank you for that really robust answer. And this is a question for Matt. How does the design and presentation of a product influence its licensing potential?
It can tremendously, but there are two sides of that coin. You don't want to over-design something because you want them to feel that they have room for input, and often it can lead to more engagement during the licensing deal, and further conversations and spitballing. But on the other hand, you want your concept fleshed out because there is no shortage of good ideas. There are shortages of solutions. So people show me rough ideas all the time that, yes, can they be finished? Can they be done? Yes. Do they have great licensing potential? Probably not. Because when it comes to consumer goods, it's often based on retail availability, and retail is slot filling, and companies are looking to fill particular notches in their line, and there's only X amount of shelf space. So they're going to invest in something that's easy and going to save them money. So they're going to license something from you because you've got it sort of solved. They can put it into their line, and it saves them a year and a few $100,000, if not millions, in new development.
Do you have a particular example of where someone perhaps over-designed or really worked against themselves in their design and presentation such that it became a detriment?
I have dozens, but we'll have to talk about that, like, not on camera. Yes, well, the hardest thing in licensing is, particularly when you're new, you've got one idea or two ideas, you can't help but be married to your idea. And when people get married to their idea, they tend to over-design it. And they also tend to put crazy extensions on it that are thinking like 20. They've immediately jumped from, here's my doll idea, to they've already got like 10 movie plots like written out. They're imagining great success, but start at home base and really work your way up. Focus on the beginning. The rest will follow.
I just want to jump in on that. So I think, it's also, just like in entrepreneurship, I strongly believe in flexibility. If I just mentioned that my product was created for kids, and I never circle back to it because I want to get in where I fit in, and I can always circle back, right? And sometimes with the creative process, people get really wedded to their idea and too hard-lined, and you can block opportunity that way. For me, I want to get in and learn it, and then I'll take off. So I'm getting in if this, unless it's against a major principle, But other than that, I'm yesing it all the way. Like we can do it, I can do it, and then,
There's our panel soundbite. Get in to fit in. There's our T-shirt for the day. Asmood, we're going to take it back to you. Can you discuss the role of early development fundamentals in creating a strong foundation for successful IP licensing?
I think just a lot of things, I'd like to reiterate first what I've heard on the panel. As an inventor, it's really easy. We're so passionate about inventing to get married to an idea. So in early stage, what we've seen, the difference between IPs and inventors that are really successful versus not, how early do you align with the fundamentals, right? Think of fundamentals in 3 different buckets. One is macro, micro, and when it comes to your technology. So fundamentals in macro terms basically means a lot of you are small business owners. Where is the government putting in money? Where are the legislations coming in? For instance, if you're looking at energy, what sorts of legislations are out there? Are they funding battery? Are they funding storage? These are the sort of macro things you want to keep in mind. This is extremely important because a lot of commercialization happens, as you know, 5 to 7 years down the road, right? So you want to have that orientation. You're not going to get it 100% right, but at least you want to have that orientation in early stage, the market orientation. Second is, adding on to what Rock and Matt was saying, start your customer discovery, start your discovery processes, market discovery processes from day one. Don't wait until you get to the market. That'll be too late. So just think of the problems based on the end users or buyers who's going to pay at the end. Very important. Third fundamentals is related to technology. What we have seen is we work with a lot of deep tech labs, ventures, federal labs. If you have patented, maybe that's a different story, but if you're in early stages, we have seen a lot of technologies fail as they begin to scale. So if you are familiar with TRLs, until TRL 3 to 7, doing very well, but as soon as they start scaling and getting ready to market, things start really faltering. So think of these 3 different fundamentals, but if you have to take one key mantra out of it, that would be, hey, how do I align my technology to the market?
Excellent. And you've given a great answer that I think really leads into our next question. And this next question is for all of our panelists. And we've already touched on it. Each of you have touched on it slightly. But let's really hone in on what are the common challenges faced by innovators when looking to license their IP, and how can they overcome them? Let's set the path so that perhaps some of the members of our audience can avoid some of the common pitfalls. Who'd like to begin?
I mean, I guess the biggest obstacle is getting in front of the company, right? I mean, that's what everybody wants to do. Because I'm sure every one of you feels like if you can get in front of the right person, you could sell your product. The best way to do that is, if you don't have any connections, is to slowly build them. LinkedIn works tremendously well. I use it all the time. It opens a lot of doors, trade shows, events like this. But don't be forceful. Don't overdo it either. You don't want to get creepy. But But you should also ask if they have an inventor relations department. Many companies do. They have an appointed person that reviews products. So just find out who that person is and then reach out. And of course, some companies have portals. You could use those too. Although I do recommend that if you use the portal, that's great, but you need to find somebody at the company also to make sure that it doesn't get lost in that portal. And then some intern who just smoked a joint behind the dumpster didn't just like misplace it.
I'll tag on to that a little.
Tread
What-
cautiously, Rock. Tread
It's
cautiously.
legal in certain states.
What I was going to say is, just like sales, just like retail, the hardest part is finding the right person. That can, just like retail, to find the exact person, because you can find someone in Target and that person only deals with child wear, right? And then that has nothing to do with kitchen. And it can, in my experience, that has been the longest and the hardest process. But it's not really, my approach is always to, I'm very aggressive, and I will ask and ask and ask, and it's not necessarily just in just one place, So certainly at the company, and yes, trade shows, but your network. You'd be surprised in your career who will connect you to the best contact. It's not always as obvious as you think. And so I would just really ask a lot in your network. Who knows, do you know anyone who has license in this particular, and be particular about your question too, right? So that your question needs to be targeted so that your answer is as close to what it is that you need. Right, if someone has done licensing in medical and you're trying to do a toy, it's, it may not lead you in the, So there is really just a lot of work around understanding. So don't feel like if you don't know and you feel a little lost, like it's designed that way. It takes time to figure it out. It's really not it's not a direct road. Just like getting your patent, if you got it right off the bat, then good for you, because I did not. I never do, as a matter of fact, So I just kind of want to lay the groundwork to say that it's not an easy road, but it's totally possible. So if you get 20 no's, that's kind of like the norm. You know what I mean? You just have to keep going. And the more you do it, and this is what I tell entrepreneurs all the time, like there should not be a day that you aren't doing something toward your business goal, your IP goal, and that could be as simple as reaching out to 2 people. I mean, there's got to be something that you do every single day, every single day, every single day. And if you do that every day for a year, that's 365, inquiries, you'd be surprised. And if you don't do that, then you won't know if you're headed in the wrong direction or if you need to tweak, or, you know what I mean? It's just a process in general. So you're on the right path just being here, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it like it's easy, because it's not.
I just want to, so the panel's monetizing your IP through licensing, right? So it's about making money through your licensing deals. So the best way to go about that, or to figure out what you got to do, is get a hold of a contract. Doesn't even have to be the contract you're going to use. There'll be specific points to each one within that contract. Those are the questions that you need to discuss up front before you even get to your contract. So understanding what the company's distribution is. Where are their rights? Are they worldwide? Are they in a particular area? Are they in a particular industry? Can you use your patent or your idea in other industries where it is not applicable, so that you can multiple license to different people? Again, back to definitions. You want to find out what the definitions of your percentages are, and also when you can terminate. These are all very important things. So work backwards. Like I said, get a hold of a contract and make those your key points. Then, by the time you get the contract, you're going to save a lot of money on legal, and you'll get a better deal.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, at FitTech, we have a startup survival rate of 70%, startups that survive beyond 1 year. And a lot of these startups are commercializing IP. So we try to understand, right, like why Like, we're surprised in a nice way. And one thing we've really found is, at least for both inventors and startups, is taking this ecosystem approach. This is what Matt and Rock, like she was, I think, alluding to. So by ecosystem, we mean when entrepreneurs come to our program, they have structured 10 to 12 week webinars. What I'm basically saying is they have a lot of support system in places, right? You have webinars, you have coaches. It's a very complex system. You need to talk to your lawyers, accountants. You need to be your own finance person. So there's all these people. You don't have to do it all, but you need to have an ecosystem. So taking this as not an individual pursuit, although it will be to a degree, but say, hey, how do I really start to create an ecosystem around me and pull on the right support at the right time? And this approach, we feel, if you take that, because you'll have to pivot a lot along the way. It's a very complex process. And patenting is a milestone, it's not a goal, right? The goal is to monetize it. So having this ecosystem approach, we feel, we've seen really work. And maybe this is a takeaway you can tell, who in my network can I leverage and I build an ecosystem around?
That's very helpful. And those common challenges, you've each addressed a number of them. And I think those are all fantastic takeaways. To continue that conversation forward, and we've talked about networks, we've talked about finding the right people to help take us to the next level. Raquel, can you really hone in on how do you identify and approach potential licensing partners, and what qualities do you recommend looking for in a strong partner?
The first is reputation, and this goes back to the network again, right? But you can research. So, like for instance, a couple of years ago, especially when the As Seen on TV was bigger, I mean, that's a whole nother story, but there were definitely some companies that you wanted to avoid. And I wouldn't have known that unless I did the research and asked people.
Some?
Well, I don't want to say all. Some were worse than others, right? Well, they're not as big anymore, although I think it's coming back in a different form. I love infomercials, by the way, so I'm a big fan and hoping that they do make a more of a comeback. But there was licensing involved in that, right? And so reputation is very important, but it all goes into your research, right? Being clear on exactly what it is that you're looking for. Like, you're talking about the contracts. Would it be long-term, short-term, understanding who owns the IP, your percentages. There's so many different things that you have to research. But reputation is very important, because that, and getting the feedback from other people, because that really will save you a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of heartache at the end of the day.
The biggest mistake I see inventors make is they put way more focus on the patent IP than the trademark. The trademark can be worth 1,000-fold over the patent of the product, because the product might launch the brand, but the brand can extend to hundreds of, if not more, items. And if you did a bad contract and you only got paid on the item, but they built an entire brand off of your item, you will not be entitled to anything under that trademark. Now I will drop the mic.
Matt, in fact, has answered our next question, but we're going to still make him answer it again. We're going to give him another opportunity. And before I do that, however, because Rock called out shady partners, being careful, being aware, I would encourage everyone in your spare time to visit the USPTO website and to view our information located there on how to avoid being scammed, both in the realm of patents and in trademarks. The questions to ask, the things to look out for. So infomercial held. Matt, can you provide an example of a successful licensing deal and what factors contributed to its success? I'm sure you've got hundreds.
A successful licensing.
That was the sigh of success, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, there was one item I did twice, once in about a decade apart. It was called Storytime Theater. I did it with a company called Spin Master in 2006, where I had a decent licensing deal on that. But then Disney came back around and asked me to relaunch it. So I relaunched it with a smaller company, and I was able to get like twice the royalty rate that second time around. I forgot what the question was.
An example of a successful licensing deal and what factors contributed to its success. So how is
So
it
moderate
that second
success.
time around?
So sometimes, yes, I guess my point is being, you might have had a licensing deal and the item disappeared. It can come back. So the factor is being like, just because something wasn't a success out the gate doesn't mean that you can't bring it back at a later point and actually have an even bigger success. Because it's very common. You know, lots of things can contribute to a failure of a product or the success. You know, it's things like just not realizing a price point. A great example of that is Trivial Pursuit was a closeout because it was too expensive, and then when they put it on closeout, it blew out, and then it was re-engineered to hit that price point. So, you know, as they say, success has many fathers and failure is an orphan, right? No one's going to tell you what was done wrong, but you have to pay attention to those factors. So if it doesn't work now, it might work again later. And sometimes it's just reimagining it, or sometimes just handing it off to somebody else who might just have a whole new clear vision. You might be like, you know what, I tried, I did this 10 different ways, nobody got it. You can hand it to somebody else and they might say, it's not a kid's item. It should be put into colleges, and then now it's big success. It was just the demographic was missed.
It feels like some of that might be avoided with customer discovery or better customer discovery. Is that possible? Is that a failure point?
Absolutely. I've never seen a product that was a major success because everything was done right. I think a lot of it just falls into place, and it hits a certain level of success based on just.
There is such a thing as luck.
Yeah,
Right.
there really is. There's plenty of great products that went nowhere, and then I often see people who get super excited. They got a great licensing deal. Tons of money has been put into it. They're already looking at new houses and boats and all this crazy stuff. But I have to remind you, every summer there's a movie that's going to be the big blockbuster that fails in the opening weekend. Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Asmood, our next question is for you, and that's what strategies do you recommend for innovators to ensure their IP is effectively monetized through licensing? What strategies? Like how should they be planning and mapping out their path forward?
Yeah, this is a big question, right? Big elephant in the room. How do you really go forward? The key, I think, is to always align first your invention to the market. Ultimately, someone has to pay. You have to monetize, right? But when it comes to monetization, different ways to think, I always like to ask two questions. Who's going to pay and how? Like the who could be really different, right? Just think of your market segmentation. Are you setting up a business, which a lot of you are doing, and apply for this government grants, non-dilutive funding? Are you going to approach a small startup or business to get a license? Are you going to a corporate? You don't have to figure out strategy from day one, but you want to start thinking who is going to pay. And when I was working in Asia in early stage venture building, a banker once told me, Osmo, the color of the money doesn't matter, right? Whether it's blue or green, it's resources flowing through your door that matters ultimately. So you want to think of who, but the second thing you also want to think about is how. We are talking about licensing, but take a step further and think about really commercializing and monetizing your IP, right? Do you do sales? Do you do equity? Do you do staged revenue? Do you take a consulting gig and do a subcontract. There's so many different avenues, and doesn't one answer, as we are talking, doesn't fit all. It's really up to you, given your stage, to figure out what works best for you. So the key is start figuring this out early, and the successes we have seen, one of the most successful businesses and inventors, they fail fast and they fail often. It's not, you won't get, you'll probably have to knock a lot of 100 different doors before someone comes back to you and say, hey, like, yeah, let's have the contractual discussion, right? So the key, if you have to do one or two takeaway, think of who is going to pay ultimately. There will be different payers, and just try to have those conversations early and be prepared to fail.
Matt, Rock, Asmood, we've had so much fun. We are out of time. Thank you for all of your expertise
Thank you.
and insights. It's been a pleasure.